So not only does Montana Chamber advocate for business at the state level, we work closely with our congressional delegation at the federal level. While Senator Tester, Daines, and Congressman Rosendale could not be here in person today, they did send video messages. And so we're going to play a message from each of our representatives and senators, and then we will go forward from there. Thank you very much.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to share a few words with you today, and thank you for your work over the past year to help keep our economy strong in one of its most challenging times. Like most of you, I'm looking forward to the new year and the opportunities it will bring for our state. We certainly accomplished some important things in 2021, but we got a lot more to do in the year ahead. I know that many of you still face challenges in your day-to-day operations, and everyone from small businesses to consumers are feeling the effects of supply chain issues. Fortunately, we've taken a huge step in addressing the problem by passing my bipartisan infrastructure law. And lowering costs for Montanans through long-term supply chain solutions will be among my top priorities in 2022. I'm grateful for your support of this bill and was proud to work for months with 5 Republicans, 4 other Democrats, and President Biden to get it across the finish line. My legislation will take critical steps in fixing the supply chain by repairing our crumbling roads and bridges, bringing high-speed internet to every corner of the state, and creating thousands of good-paying jobs in the process. It will not only make it easier to do business and transport goods in the Treasure State, but it will lower costs for Montana businesses and families and help us maintain our economic advantage over China for years to come. We can't wait to get this money out the door, and I'll be holding the administration and state governments accountable to ensure that it's invested swiftly and implemented right. I'll also be working with my colleagues in the Senate to ensure that any jobs and workforce bill that comes up for a vote increases opportunities for Montana small businesses and opportunities for our workers. Together, we'll continue to fight for economic prosperity in Montana, and I look forward to fighting for our state's small businesses this year in the United States Senate. Thanks again for all that you do, and please know that my door is always open.
Well, welcome to Helena for Business Days at the Capitol. And a big thank you to the Montana Chamber of Commerce for inviting me to share a few words. Montana small businesses have faced many challenges the past 2 years. They've dealt with everything from labor shortages to supply chain issues to skyrocketing inflation. Yet, thanks to the leadership from my friend and our great governor, Greg Gianforte, Montana is open for business and thriving. Our unemployment rate sits at a record low, and we're starting to see workers come off the sidelines and re-enter the labor force. And back in the United States Senate, I'm working to support our Montana small businesses and to strengthen our workforce. But meanwhile, the Biden administration is trying to push a multi-trillion dollar reckless tax and spending spree bill through the Congress. And they've imposed overreaching federal vaccine mandates that hurt Montana small businesses and workers, not help. And as your voice in the U.S. Senate, I'll continue pushing back against the Biden administration's tax and spend agenda, and we'll keep fighting for common sense policies that support Montana small businesses, our job growth, and our economy. So enjoy the rest of your conference. Thanks much.
Hello, Happy New Year, and thank you for inviting me to join the Montana Chamber of Commerce 2022 Business Days at the Capitol. While I wish I could be with you in person, I'm glad to still be able to join you virtually to give you an update on what's going on in Washington, D.C., and commend you for the important work that you're doing. Thanks to the leadership of Governor Gianforte and strong pro-business leaders in the state legislature, Montana is open for business. I was glad to see the 2021 session of the Montana legislature was a great one for Montana business. We were finally able to see numerous pro-growth victories, including income tax relief, business tax reform, liability protection, workforce development, and expanded broadband deployment bills signed into law. Thanks to these important pieces of legislation and the early action of the Gianforte administration opting out of supplemental federal unemployment benefits that incentivize government dependence over self-reliance, the unemployment rate in Montana has fallen to 2.8%, matching a record low for our state. While other states chose a path of destructive mandates and lockdowns, I'm proud to see Montana chose personal responsibility and freedom. The results speak for themselves. There is no place like Montana to live and do business, and I look forward to continuing to see businesses flock to invest in our state and in our people. But our business community still faces a variety of challenges, which is why events like this, where you get together to strategize and chart the best path forward, are so critical. Businesses that I speak to across our state are faced with surging inflation, workforce shortages, and supply chain breakdowns, worsened by continued reckless federal spending and burdensome regulatory barriers imposed by the Biden administration. As your lone voice in the United States House of Representatives, I've been fighting back hard against these misguided policies that make it harder for you to run your business and erode the freedoms that we cherish. As a member of the House Natural Resources Committee, I've been an outspoken advocate for Montana energy, forcefully pushing back on the Biden administration's war on a made-in-America energy that has tripled the price of gas in the last 18 months and made just about everything more expensive. I've helped introduce numerous bills aimed at stopping the administration from imposing vaccine mandates on Montana businesses, our healthcare workers, service members, and federal contractors and employees in Montana, and even filed a brief to the Supreme Court on the issue. It's clear these mandates impose onerous requirements on businesses, violate the rights of Montanans, and will intensify labor shortages. I also voted against Joe Biden's $5 trillion Build Back Bankrupt boondoggle, which is the largest spending bill and the largest tax increase in American history. Despite Biden's promises to the contrary, the bill would crush Montana businesses under a vast web of taxes and regulations, worsen the workforce shortage, cause a further breakdown in our supply chains, and lead to hyperinflation. As we've seen since COVID-19 reached our shores, our reliance on foreign nations like China for goods and inputs is not wise or sustainable. That's why I've been working to ensure we can return our manufacturing base to America. We can and should make these products in Montana. It secures our supply of essential goods, grows Montana businesses, and ensures that our communities can thrive. This Congress, I've also helped introduce legislation to make the Trump tax cuts permanent and expand them, rein in reckless spending, expand domestic energy and mineral production, repeal unneeded and onerous regulations, expand apprenticeship opportunities, expand access to broadband, and much more. Rest assured that I will continue to fight for Montana business and against attacks from the administration and D.C. politicians on our business community and our Montana way of life. Working with our business community and state and local leaders, I'm optimistic that we can continue to work to ensure Montana is the best state in the nation to do business, so we can enter a new era of prosperity and opportunity. Thank you again for the important work you're doing here today and for inviting me to join you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference.
We greatly appreciate our congressional delegation taking the time to send these messages and their tireless work at the federal level for our state. Thank you very much. Wow, in the last couple of days, we've heard a lot about jobs and expansion, balance, opportunities, open minds, and for this future, this is going to take a lot of diversity in people, diversity in businesses, diversity in thinking. And this is a future I'm excited for my 3 kids. I'm hoping they can all stay in Montana. And so even if they work from our ranch internationally in Ringling, Montana, or as my good friend Speaker Galtz, maybe the Tri-Cities, Martinsdale, Lenape, Ringling, Tri-Cities of Marr County. And so with that, I would love to introduce our next board. Each year we have the privilege of hearing from leaders within the state and House of Representatives. During legislative years, this panel sets the tone for the session, and during off years, it is an opportunity to hear about the interim possibilities and priorities. Moderating our panel today is Paul Hopfoff, who is the Director of Strategy, Planning, and Growth for Montana Dakota Utilities, as well as the immediate past president of the Montana Chamber Board of Directors. So please help me welcome Paul.
Good morning. As Nancy mentioned, my name is Paul Hopfoff. I'm with Montana Dakota Utilities, an MD Resources company, along with Montana Dakota Utilities. We also have in our family of companies in Montana, Knife River Corporation, Rocky Mountain Contractors right here in Helena, and WBI Energy. Last spring, the Montana Chamber wrapped up its third regular legislative session under the guidance of our 10-year strategic plan and Vision 2026. Through legislative and private sector initiatives, the Chamber is focused on making measurable progress in four critical areas: workforce development, business climate, infrastructure investment, and entrepreneurial sustainability. We look forward to continuing our work with lawmakers to advance this plan as we cross the halfway point. With that, I welcome you to a long-standing Eggs and Issues breakfast when we get the opportunity to hear directly from Montana's legislative leadership. Excuse me. I'm honored to stand here with these panelists who, along with their legislative colleagues, put their normal lives on hold last year to serve in Montana's 67th legislative session. I'm pleased to have with us Senate President Mark Blaisdell of District 4 in Kalispell. His career in the Montana legislature spans 4 terms in the House from 2007 to 2013, and 4 more in the Senate, having served there since 2015. We're also joined by Senate Minority Leader Jill Cohenauer, representing Senate District 42 in East Helena. She has also dedicated 8 terms in the legislature, both as a member of the House from 2003 to 2009, and in the Senate since 2015. Also with us this morning is Speaker of the House Wiley Gault. He represents House District 30 in central Montana and is wrapping up his 4th term in the legislature, having served in 2003 and since 2017. Last and certainly not least, we are happy to have House Minority Leader Kim Abbott. Kim has served House District 83 in Helena since 2017. Please help me welcome our legislative panel and thank them for what they do for Montana. So in terms of order this morning, we were going to start with Senator Blaisdell, then go to Senator Cohenauer, followed by Representative Gault, and close with Representative Abbott on questions. They'll begin with opening remarks, and after those opening remarks, we will open the floor for questions. Bridger and Michelle will be roaming the room with microphones. And with that, Senator Blaisdell, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning. It's great to see everybody and happy to see everybody back in person. We missed you last session. Well, it's always kind of a great start to the session. So I guess quick question, are we going to go into the accomplishments now, or do we want to do that later, or just more of an introduction right now?
Part of your opening remarks, if you'd like to, feel free. We can also cover that.
Okay. I just didn't want to duplicate. So yeah, it's been an honor. I've served for 16 years. My outside life from the legislature, I'm a family business, restaurant and catering business up in the Flathead Valley. So obviously going into this session, I knew the ramifications of what COVID did to our business. We lost about 65 to 70% of our business in that year. So I think that was one of the biggest things that I wanted to do, is to come into that session. I know we're going to be talking a lot more about that, but I grew up in this business. My mom bought it in 1981. I started as a dishwasher when I was 5, and grew up on that in the family farm, and still honored to be a part of that in the community in Kalispell as well. So turn it over to Jill.
Thank you. And I'm Jill Cohenauer, and I am, of course, the Senate Minority Leader, and I represent Senate District 42, which is basically around the Capitol and runs all the way to East Helena. And so a lot of you who know me know that I came from Havre, So I know how important ag is to the state of Montana, how important it is to make sure that our products that we make in the state of Montana are value added for businesses across our state. Because that's where the real profit is. When you grow something and then you hand it to somebody else to make it marketable, then you don't get the value of that. So I want to make sure, and I always have in my head when I'm working in the legislature, how is this going to affect our ag producers? How does this affect the businesses that depend on ag in the state of Montana? I think that that's an important concept that I keep in my everyday decision making. We had a good session. As far as relationships were concerned, I do think that we worked on some things together that were very valuable to the state of Montana, and we will talk about that later. But I do want to let you know that we do always, when the Democrats came into this session, we said that jobs and the economy were what we were focused on. And we really did try to do a lot of good stuff for businesses in the state of Montana. We were able to be successful in some of those and not so successful in others. And the one thing I wanted to let you all know is, yes, thank you for being there. Thank you for making your voice heard in the Capitol building as much as you could during this session. Even the Zoom testimony I thought was incredibly valuable to the work that we do every day. And your voice in our work is one of the most important parts of the legislative process. It's how we know that what we're doing is helping you to do what you need to do. So I hope that you continue to do that and that we continue to work together in a very respectful way in the Capitol and respect one another's need to express what our needs are and what our families' needs are and what our community needs are. That's what we're all trying to do when we're there, and I want to make sure that we continue to do that with one another and in collaboration with one another as we move forward. So I appreciate everything you've done and your voice being heard. So thank you.
Thank you. Wiley Galt from Central Montana. By day, I'm a rancher out there, so I was happy it's been a while since we've had a speaker that actually was in the agricultural industry, so I was happy to be there and bring a strong voice for agriculture to the state in my leadership role. And just before the session, said I got bored and bought the local bar in Martinsdale too, so I got to feel firsthand what it was like being open for 2 months and then having to shut down. So if anyone's headed back through Martinsdale, we're more than happy to show you the best burger in the state as you're going by. It was an interesting session with COVID. I know the minority leader and I in the House, and we don't quite have the experience the Senate does, so we were both first time heading in, and then with COVID. And I would like to thank the minority leader, said our friendship and knowing each other got us through a lot of the tough times that we were able to sit down and just talk to each other to get through it and have very civil conversations, and it helped a lot. So you can see that the session went fairly well, and I would attribute a lot of that to the friendship that Kim and I have. With that, I'll turn it over to her.
Thanks, Wiley. Hey, you guys. Thanks for having me. I appreciate being here. Wiley and I are always in a race to see who can talk for the least amount of time, and he wins every time. No, I think, I would just echo that. I think relationships are incredibly important, especially in hard times, and in this particular setting where we have term limits and people are moving in and out, Mark and Jill both switched chambers, and they have a lot of history in the building, and Wiley and I were newer. I think that our caucus, in the House, we came into a difficult session, obviously. We were in the deep minority, and we wanted to fight for our communities and fight for our local businesses that we represent. And we came in with a focus on jobs in the economy, and we came in with a focus on trying to invest in communities in a way that would support businesses, but also support the labor force that allows y'all to be open and allows y'all to run. And so I think we took a balanced approach to the way that we addressed, regulations that might not be useful anymore, that might not be doing what they were meant to do when they were proposed or passed, but also looking at ways to invest in affordable housing. We know that, people that want to work need a place to live where jobs are. And so we really looked at ways to increase affordable housing, both on the supply side and on the affordability side. And we looked at ways to increase access to childcare. We know that a lot of people can't re-enter the job market because there's not access to any childcare, let alone affordable childcare. So, we brought, I think, a number of policies that we're proud of. Like Jill said, we had some trouble getting them across the finish line. Numbers weren't in our favor. But I think, in terms of game changers for you all and game changers for the Montana economy, we have an incredible opportunity with broadband. And I think our job is to make sure that that money is getting out the door in an efficient, effective, and transparent way to open up broadband for all of Montana. And to look at workforce shortages in a broader context of housing affordability, childcare affordability. So we'll continue to do that. I think we had some success this session doing it, and obviously in the interim with the American Recovery Act, we have a lot of opportunity too. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you for those opening remarks, and I have to apologize. Bridger's in the back with the microphone. Michelle is up front with the microphone, so if you have questions, please raise your hand. And Bridger, I'm going to apologize to Bridger in the back. He's looking at me like, you're right, you missed it. I need to mention, if you could please maybe keep the mic close to you, both on the panel and on the audience, just to help the microphones pick up the sound. And with that, please raise your hand, and we'd be happy to take questions for the panel.
Great. Maybe as folks are thinking of some, I might jump in with just another general one for the group here. Perhaps from each of you, and some of you had touched on accomplishments from 2021, but I want to make sure all four of you utilize the opportunity as well. If we could just start with Senator Blaisdell again on some of the, maybe two or three of the biggest wins that you thought came out of the session, and we'll just go down the line. Thanks.
Sure. Well, thank you, Bridger, and I want to thank you and your team and everybody at the Chamber for their work, not only in committee, but providing data. And, I think every member could reach out to you when we had questions. Obviously, I think the first accomplishment we had is we had a productive session. If you remember, we were kind of in uncharted times when we went into this. There's still a lot of questions about COVID. There was a lot of people that said that we shouldn't have a session. We had if you think about it, we have 150 legislators come all across the state, and not everybody in the state views COVID in the same way, or in our communities we're treating it in the same way. So to try to take 150 personalities and try to bring them into one chamber, two chambers, and make a productive session, and also to focus on the health, welfare, and safety of not only the public so that they could participate, but also for our staff as well and the legislators. And I give a lot of credit to Senate Pro Tem Ellsworth, Minority Leader Konauer, Senator Pomnikowski. These three and other members spent countless days and hours on the phone over Thanksgiving as we were trying to go through the rules and try to figure out how to adapt this session to make it work. And all the credit goes out to the world for our IT staff and Susan Fox's team up there at the legislature. Right now, we're kind of one of the crown jewels when they go around to other states and they show how we did this session, not only for the public to be able to participate in so many different ways, but for us as legislators to be able to participate from home or from our office space or on the floor, depending on what our needs were and our concerns. So to have that run on time, yes, we did have a few cases, but I think we had a plan that we enacted quickly. The members that were contract-based willingly stayed away out of the Capitol to make sure that the session could continue to go on. And we wrapped up the session in 80 days. So a lot of work went into it, and I think that's the biggest thing. One of the things we said is, we asked Montanans to go to work every single day. So why aren't we as well? We wanted to work with Governor Gina Forte on to open Montana back up for business. I think there was a lot of frustration and a lot of energy from, I'd say, our caucus especially. For 9 months, we heard from constituents and business owners, what can you do? Why haven't you done something to help us open back up or to free up certain things? And so we went into the session and we took a look at a lot of those issues. First, we passed COVID liability protections for businesses so they can open their doors and have some protections for themselves and not be concerned about being sued. We placed some controls on the local health board. By no means did we ever want to stop the health boards from being able to make important decisions on in short notice on emergencies and certain things in our local, but these ordinances and these mandates that were coming down and not having anybody that was elected to have to go be accountable to the voters, we wanted to make sure that the county commissioners or an elected board that has to go face their electors would have to answer to those decisions if they were going to maintain these mandates. We also rolled back a number of the governor's emergency powers. I commend the Gina Forte administration. This is not something that easy for the executive branch to do, to want to give up power that they had from to the legislative branch, but they did. They recognized that there were issues with how long this emergency order went on, and that he was able to keep these mandates in place without any interaction with the legislature unless we had a special session. We were able to interject to where now the legislature has a role when massive amounts of federal money comes in, like it did last year for appropriation ability, that we have an ability to be in that process with the executive branch when it's not the session. We helped protect now where on elections that the governor does not get to go in and say that all elections will be a mail ballot, or that without involving the legislature. And we limited the length of these emergency powers, of how long these emergencies can go on before there will be a poll of the legislature. Another priority that we did is we felt it was time for the taxpayers to get some money back in their pockets, and we passed over $120 million in tax relief. That included lowering the income tax rate, which now went from 6.9 to 6.75 and will go down to 6.5 in 2025. We also simplified the income tax system. We raised the exemption from $100,000 to $300,000 on business equipment tax, so that I believe up to 4,000 more small businesses and family farms will not be paying the equipment tax. We repealed the sunset on the pollution control equipment, so that businesses that are mandated to put in this pollution control equipment are not going to have to be paying taxes on that equipment. We invested $2 million in employee training for businesses in tax credits so that they can train their employees and get them certified. We passed the Montana Entrepreneur Act so that we can bring more businesses and more entrepreneurs and startup businesses into Montana. I have to give credit to my colleague, Representative David Fern, a Democrat from Whitefish. He took my job creation tax credit from 2019 that was vetoed, and he led the way with that bill to help pass it again, and that was a bipartisan effort by all of us, and he was great to work with on that. And we worked on the corporate monetization tax to make it for more of a level playing field for all businesses in Montana. And there was a lot of bipartisan work. We passed the K through 12 inflationary increase within the first 2 months. This is a bill that used to go all the way to the end of the session, and local schools sat and waited to see what was going to happen. We had bipartisan work on marijuana legislation, on infrastructure, and I believe on the ARPA rollout so that we could work through the interim on that as well. So a lot of good things, a lot of good business things this session, and it was a pleasure to work with everybody.
Well, Mark pretty much talked about everything.
This is my swan song.
There you go. Well, and so I'll just piggyback a little bit on some of the things that he talked about as successes during the session. You know, we really did work super hard. I know a lot of you paid attention to what was going on with the marijuana legislation, and that was a really hard thing for the legislature to try to walk in the door and find consensus to come out the other side so that our legalization of marijuana actually goes smoothly. And if you've been watching the news, you're seeing that there's still some bumps in the road, but I think we've gotten to a place where, you know, now that it is legal for folks to actually buy it, that's going to go smoothly in communities, and the processes are going to work. And we all in the legislature worked really, really hard to make that go as well as it could be from our standpoint, because we want communities to flourish. We want them to do well. We want the tax money to be able to go into the things that are important to Montanans, which we worked really hard to make sure that some of the tax money went into healthcare and mental health and substance abuse programs. And all of those things that Mark talked about, a lot of times you'll see us vote against things, and it's really not voting against the end result, which is to help people or do something specific. What it really is about is how do we get there? And I think that, the relationships, that Mark and I have had and that we've developed over a long period of time and that Kim and Wiley have as well, is how we are able to craft legislation and then work on it together. We, as Democrats, even in a minority, we affect that legislation. We craft it, we work together, we make changes that works for all Montanans and make people think through how it affects other areas of Montana. So we really do, all of us in the legislature, take our work very seriously, and we do work hard together. So I am really proud of that work on the marijuana legalization, because that was a very, very difficult thing for us to have to do in the middle of the session. I kind of wish we had had some interim time to do that, but we really didn't, and we needed to come out with legislation that would work, and that was really well done. And I would also piggyback on the discussion that Mark had about the ARPA funds. We had to do some way for the legislature to participate in the interim, knowing that there's going to be ongoing federal monies that are coming into the state. And we all worked really hard to make sure that we had the ability to work with the Gianforte administration during the interim and have a say in how the funds were spent in communities. And I think that also gave you all a process that allows for you to participate in the interim. It's not just something that happens, without your fingers on it as well. And so we worked really hard to make sure that we were all able to work together, that we have our say, that you have a process to participate in the interim as well, to have your voice heard. So we're very proud of all of those, a lot of other accomplishments as well, and working together to craft legislation and focus it. There is some places where I think we missed the boat. Bridger, put out to us that we could have done better in some areas. And I would point out a couple of things that I think would have been really good for Montana. We had the right to repair that was brought by Senator Sweeney. And would have been really good for our ag producers in the state of Montana, to allow them to be able to repair their own equipment. And my hope is that that's something that we can work on in the future as well. And then Senator Jacobson also had country of origin labeling, which for Montana manufacturing and value added, that's going to be something that we really have to have. That's something that Montana needs to grow, is our ability to manufacture here in our state. Those are jobs. That's an economy that we should have. The folks that grow things should be able to get the value of adding to that product and packaging it and then distributing it, because that's a place where we can keep our economy at a very high level. We also had Senator Morgeau's bill that would have allowed for businesses to pay student loans for their employees without that money being taxed as wages. We thought that would have actually done some really great things as we were moving forward and our economy started to rev up. So that's just a few things that we think that we think we kind of missed the boat on, that we're hopeful can continue to be a part of future legislation and future legislative discussions. So, turn it over to Wiley.
Thank you. As the upper chamber usually does, they steal all the thunder from the House. But through all of that long list, you have to remember we did this in 80 days. I believe that I was told it's the most amount of bills in the shortest amount of time we've ever done. And a lot of that was efficiency. I know the pace got a little wild there towards the end, especially with marijuana showing up late and the ARPA funds showing up late. So we did those two big pieces of legislation by the second half of the session. And it was interesting times. I think I did a lot of laps around the Capitol between the governor and the third floor. But, I'll expand a little bit on some of the agricultural stuff. But we did start opening up some more meat processing to try to allow states around us to enter into a compact to kind of get around the federal and the big four from keep capping us and allow a little more processing in Montana. Because it was strange during COVID, we have a state with more cows than people, that there wasn't meat in the grocery store. But you could walk down the street and see one running down the road. So we moved a lot of that. We did a lot of common sense for agriculture, as far as, winter overload permits, moving hay without all of the barriers that sometimes come with it. So agriculture will be better off after this session. And talked with stock growers a couple weeks ago, and I told them, there's fewer and fewer boots underneath the desks in there. So agriculture needs to take a strong stand in the next couple sessions and really set themselves up to keep going into the future.
Wiley wouldn't even let us eat lunch at the end of the session. I just want you all to know that. The pace did get a little rough, but we had big, like Wiley said, we had big bills coming our way, including marijuana and the American Recovery Act implementation bill, which Representative Gardner carried. I saw him back there. That's a generational opportunity for us. It's an opportunity to invest in every corner of our state, in infrastructure, in housing supply, in access to childcare, and like Mark said, we're able to work on that during the interim. And I know that our caucus has been frustrated by the pace, and so I think our role in this is to really stay on the administration and stay on Mark and Wiley to make sure that the pace is good and make sure money's getting out the door and into communities and getting put on the ground. In terms of successes this session, I think that we had a couple that are really meaningful because of our numbers. It took a lot more work to move things through the two chambers and get it to Governor Gianforte's desk for his signature. Derek Harvey, who's out of Butte, had Dig Once, which increased efficiency for laying fiber. Essentially, it basically says that telecoms have to get a notice from the Department of Transportation when they're digging, so that telecoms can get in there and lay fiber if they want to. It increases efficiency and effectiveness. We're really proud of that. Mary Cafaro got $10 million for rapid workforce retraining. One of our big goals is to connect training dollars and that opportunity for investment that we have through ARPA to what we know are going to be the jobs on the ground as we pursue these infrastructure projects. We want to connect those things. We think that's really important, and we'll be working on that. And Representative Cafaro's bill was one of those things. We recognize that healthcare is one of the biggest and the fastest growing industries in the state, and we recognize that we need to protect the gains that we've had in our healthcare system. And we did that. Mafi Funk and Mark Thane worked hard to really make sure that we're improving those gains. I know that, over 60% of businesses in the state of Montana have an employee on Medicaid. We need to protect Medicaid. We need to make sure that it's working well, that it's covering people's lives, protecting their health. And that we're paying attention to an industry that's really growing and making sure that we're strengthening it, not undercutting it. And I think we did that too. So we'll continue through the interim to really pay attention to these ARPA commissions and really make sure that we're moving efficiently and effectively to the extent that we have an ability to do that. Thanks.
All right, we have a question from Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you. One of the hallmarks of Governor Gianforte's campaign was initiatives to roll back regulations to incent business development in Montana and to remove roadblocks. It's only been a year, but has there been, would you comment on whether or not that has been shown any fruit at this point, and whether or not that is really benefiting? Representative Babbitt mentioned affordable housing, and that would be one thing. It would seem to me that one approach to affordable housing is for government to do more. It would seem to me that the governor's perspective is to do less and let the building industry to prosper. Is that the approach that seems to be working?
So I can start out at least to say something about it. Specifically in the housing situation, there was a bill that went through the legislature and actually made it to the governor's desk, and he vetoed it rather than putting it through to see what it would do on the ground. I do think that there should be a combination of government doing a better job of allowing for the building industry to do what they do. But if we're looking at what's happening out on the ground, the cost of land to even and purchase something right now and to try to build and all of that, what the bills that we do in the legislature, what they do is they provide some federal funding and the ability for those dollars to flow through to projects for low-income housing. The money's available. What we're not doing is putting it out to actually put it on the ground on behalf of the people who need the housing and the businesses that need the workers that need the housing. I've talked to so many businesses in the city of Helena and East Helena that are telling me, I interview somebody, they're going to be great for my business. I offer them the job. They come and they try to find a place to live, and then they tell me they can't take the job because they have nowhere to live that's affordable for their families. So this is a crisis, not just for, the state of Montana, but specifically for our business communities. And it is something that the legislature can actually do something about. And it's not, state money, which I also think that state money would be a good investment in a housing situation. But I'm very concerned that what you talked about is kind of the thought, let's just let the market do it. Well, the market can't afford it unless we can flow some money through in some of these incentives that would allow for some of this stuff to get built. It is the margin that would allow for these things to actually get built, especially at the prices that we are right now. So I do think the legislature has a role, and I think we should actually focus on that, and we will be focusing on that as one of our top priorities going into the next session. We know what a crisis it is for folks that are at the lower incomes and even moderate incomes to find a place to live. And I hear about these increases, especially in our more urban areas, but that's actually rolling all out to the rural areas as well. My husband's brother just purchased some land. He had to go all the way to Three Forks from Bozeman to try to find anything that was reasonable. And it wasn't very reasonable, just so everybody knows. But, he was able to pick something up, and it's a long-term deal for him as he's living in a trailer down by the railroad.
It's I do believe that we're seeing some. There's a lot more to come. I know the Lieutenant Governor Juris has been just digging through all of it. So I think a lot more of the regulation rollback you're going to see next session. I mean, you have to remember Governor Gianforte had all of about 2 weeks to get ready before we showed up. And so he kind of hit the ground running with having to build a budget and all of that. So I think a lot of that you're going to see next session. And I do believe that there's going to be a lot of fruit to bear from those trees.
Regulations aren't inherently good or bad. Regulations are meant to even the playing field, keep people safe, keep buildings safe. And so I'm actually really excited for a designated, intentional process to roll through and see what's working and see what's not working. I think that we're going to be able to eliminate a lot of things that either aren't serving the purpose that they were meant to serve or are not practically having the impact that we thought they would. And we're going to expose gaps too. I think that there's a perception that like Democrats love regulations. And that's not true. I mean, I love some regulations. I like some regulations that keep my family safe and keep my community functioning. But others feel like bureaucracy to me, and they feel needless. And I think that we need, and I'm glad that the governor is pursuing a process that can look at that, analyze, and say, this serves a purpose, it's keeping our community safe, or this serves a purpose and it's keeping access to an important service open for folks, or it's not. And let's get rid of the ones that aren't working. Let's keep the ones that are. In terms of affordable housing, I think that some building regulations are probably slowing down the ability for us to increase supply. And we should look at that and we should address it. But other regulations keep people safe. We've had 2 really devastating fires, not here in Montana, but nationally, that ripped through buildings. And that has to do with codes, we need to be honest about the fact that not all regulations are bad. Not all regulations are good. We want them to serve the purpose that they were meant to serve and keep our families and our communities safe. So I support the governor's initiative, and I'm excited to see what comes out of it.
Just a couple items. Minority Leader Conower talked about the bill that was vetoed. I believe the fiscal note on that was approximately about $47 million over 10 years, but one of the concerns the governor had was that it was tied to the federal index, and so there was really no control for the state to say that that's exactly how much it was going to cost. If things went up, the state could be on the hook for more, I believe was what it had in his veto letter. But I'd have to go back. We did just in one of our ARPA commissions, we did just pass $15 million in gap financing. We had 1,000 units that were kind of in limbo that had already went through all the processes, were in place. Many of them had been started, but with inflation and the high costs of everything, some of those projects weren't going to come to bear if we didn't. So we felt that was a proper allocation to get those 1,000 units, done in a considerable time. I think we did do some things on subdivision review processes and timelines. I believe Director Dorrington right now is working on trying a way to help streamline the permitting process through the DEQ. Obviously, we want to protect water. We want to protect Montana's environment, but I hear a lot of frustration from engineers and contractors of this process and how long it takes. I think the speakers noted that, if you think about it, Governor Gianforte, when he won the election, he was still our congressman as well. And there was a lot going on for that last month and a half back in D.C. as they were going through another COVID relief bill. And he was working on Montana and his team as they brought on their directors. Some of those directors came on a month into the session or a couple weeks into the session. So it's taken them some time to get into these departments and really analyze it. I'm excited about the red tape. I think you're going to see a lot of it. If you remember here a few sessions ago, Governor Bullock had Main Street Montana project, and there was a lot of excitement from a lot of business groups and a lot of people that got involved in that and worked in the different. But I also heard a lot of frustration from all of the work and effort that they didn't necessarily see some of those things come to fruition that they'd hoped. So I look forward to seeing what that produces. I think you're going to see it come to fruition. I believe, we tried to, what we said we were going to do this session, we did. And I think that you'll see a lot of that come to fruition this next session as well.
All right, I made the challenge to the group yesterday to lean into some tough conversations, so I'm going to follow through on that. At the Chamber Board, we were a little bit disappointed to see this ballot initiative coming forward to potentially cap property taxes, thinking, does that mean that taxes for businesses are going to go way up? So I just bring up that point to ask, we all know we need tax reform, and we'd rather see that happen at the legislative process than on a ballot initiative. But could you talk more about what are those tough conversations that you've been having about tax reform, and where do you think that's going over the next couple of years?
Yeah, and we did some work on property tax this session. Property tax is a tough one for the legislature to deal with because most of it's driven by the communities, cities, and counties. So I think that a lot of this, especially with this ballot initiative, is just going to come down to education for people to understand where property taxes come from and how they work. I mean, the best example I have heard is the water bed. So this won't release any water out of the bed when it comes to it. It just pushes down and pushes water to another person, be it agriculture, commercial, that will end up having to take those hikes. So I think education is going to be very important when it comes to that, and continuing not only down to the counties and cities to start learning that property tax is becoming a problem in this state. It's becoming expensive, and we need to do something, but it has to be at the county and city level to get it done.
Only an egg guy would think a water metaphor provided clarity. That initiative is really dangerous for all the reasons I don't need to get into it. I think I hope we don't see it on the ballot, frankly. But in terms of an approach to tax and revenue, like everything, you need a balanced approach. And what we're seeing is things getting a little out of balance. And Senator Conower was on the interim Revenue Committee last cycle that really dug in and looked at different ways that we could approach fairness in our tax system. You know, from my perspective and because of my professional life, I get really worried about the burden on people who are lower income, and that getting out of whack. We have, a lot of pressure on localities. Wiley was never there, but we sat on the tax committee during the session. He had more important things to do, but we heard just about every day from localities about how they were struggling. They wanted the ability to do a local option sales tax. I worry about that increasing in equity across the region. It's a really tough problem, and honestly, we have Democrats and Republicans have like really different ideological approaches to that problem, so it makes compromise pretty difficult. You know, the tax policies that Mark ticked off at the beginning of this, I voted against, I think, all of them. I'd have to go back and check. And that was because I didn't think they were targeted at the people that need them the most. I didn't think that they would have the impact that the governor thinks that they're going to have, and we'll find that out, right? Like we're gonna assess and analyze those tax policies and see if they did the things that the governor thinks that they were going to do. But I was really worried that folks that are lower income and middle income really got left behind in the tax policies that were passed this last session. And these are the folks that we really count on to drive our economy. It takes a labor force, and we're feeling that pressure right now in a serious way to drive our economy, and we need to take care of those folks too. And I just thought it lacked a balance. So I'm sorry that's not an answer, but I think we have really hard work to do.
Yeah, I believe there's got to be a lot of analysis on this initiative, but I come from the Flathead, and I remember back in 2009 when that reappraisal hit, and folks on the lake, property taxes went from $2,000 or $3,000 a year. By after the 6-year phase-in, we're up to $17,000 to $18,000 a year. So the frustration is growing. One of the things that we did try to do this session is try to educate the taxpayers themselves. One of the things we want people to see on their property tax bill is how much have they done to themselves. Like I've had a lot of voters over the time scream at me about their property taxes, and I say, I don't care if you did, but did you just vote for that $55 million bond to build the new school? And well, yes. Well, then you can't yell at me about your property taxes because you just voted to increase them. And I think the voters have to look at how much of this they've done to themselves, and I think they need to look at the local city and county governments of how much they're raising theirs as well. There's a lot of wants that a lot of the citizens want in these communities, and they all cost money, and it takes away from fire and police and water and sewer as there's so many different requests, and that all costs money, and that all goes into that property tax. We've got to remember, pretty much all but the 6 mills and property taxes stays local. 6 mills the voters put on every 10 years to support the university system. The other 95 mills that come to the state for education is completely sent right back to the local communities to support those school districts. So this is all local money. The state doesn't, deal with that. The other challenge is the 2-year reappraisal process. I was not a big fan of it. I recognize that the 6-year reappraisal, yes, people were getting sticker shock every 6 years with what the value, but it gave the legislature the ability to incrementally bring that up maybe 1/6 a year. With the 2-year, we're kind of on cruise control. If the executive, if it's not in the budget to decrease the 20 to 30 million a year in increase, when we try to do something with that shows in a fiscal note, and we have to try to balance the budget that way. So I think it's something that everybody's going to really have to look at. But the residents, it's a growing frustration, and I don't think they necessarily analyze that waterbed effect of when they push down here, their electric bills will go up here. Their grocery store down the street's going to have to raise their prices as well. And so there's going to have to be a lot of discussion about that. So.
So, and I wanted to specifically mention the initiative. I am very hopeful that your organization is going to get pretty active in the initiative process, because if we can keep that off the ballot, that's going to be good for everyone. But part of this is what Mark was just talking about, is the education for our, the taxpayers. They think the legislature can basically relieve the property taxes, when that really is essentially what we've set up, is that the state stays out of that and we allow for local government to basically tax the property in order to fund what they need. And I agree with Mark. I think the taxpayers don't understand, what that stuff goes to, and that yes, it does come up to the state, but we do turn around and send that back out to the counties and back out to local governments and back to the schools. That's very much a flow through kind of a deal, but it gives us the leverage and ability to kind of affect it. In the case of this ballot initiative, this is going to be very bad for the state of Montana. And when you look specifically at the mill levy cap, who's going to take the brunt of that? Does the state get their money and then the localities have to deal with whatever's left, and then the schools get nothing? Do the schools get their cut first and then the state gets nothing? That's one area where I think that this is really going to be bad for the state of Montana. And I am very hopeful that your membership and the folks that you talk to will help us to maybe keep this off the ballot. And I was talking to Bridger a little bit earlier, and I told him, I said, the best thing you can say is Montana is not California, right? And I think that actually is something that we might be able to say to people and tell them, this is not how we do business here. And the effect on businesses and local communities is going to be tremendous. We cannot overstate that. So I'm really hopeful. I'm trying to work with some Republican colleagues on the Revenue Interim Committee to start a process where we can start having discussions about it. So I hope that you guys will engage with us during the interim to help us get the message out to people. Don't sign this thing. It's going to be bad for us. It's going to be bad for our communities. It's going to be bad for our families. And maybe we can just keep it off the ballot. And that's my greatest hope, because it's better to do it this way than to do it in court, because I think that that's also not a place that is very good for us to make policy. So I do hope that you guys take action and that you're willing to work really hard on this during the interim to help us out.
Great discussion there. We've got Tom Schultz with a question.
Thank you. I wanted you guys to discuss what you guys are talking about when it comes to helping with child care problems that we have in the country. You look at our labor market, obviously it's affected by housing, but it's also affected by child care. You look at the studies the BBER did regarding how much it's costing our economy. They call it inadequate child care. That gives, I think, some legitimate, or it gives some information. It informs us to maybe help solve this problem. But what's the discussion about helping with child care without creating this cradle-to-grave government dependency?
So there are significant and serious discussions on childcare at the legislative level, also in private business, and I'm not the person that's leading those discussions, so I want that to be clear. But I think right now we have an opportunity with ARPA money to get childcare resources into existing childcare businesses to help them maintain or expand the access that they're already providing. So that's one thing that we're doing, and that's one of the discussions that we're having now. You know, in terms of expanding childcare, I think that it has to be a public-private partnership. We're not going to be able to address the problem without some government intervention in it, and that's partly bringing costs down, and that's partly making sure that we're giving access in areas that it's hard to create childcare in. I think we can look at proposals where childcare businesses want to expand, and we can invest in that. We can look at opportunities for private co-ops and how we can support that. I think that there's a lot of energy around, you know, the idea of businesses pooling resources and working with either state or local governments to create their own childcare. I know that Terry's daughter, is opening up a childcare facility herself for her business in Michigan. So that, those are interesting ideas that I think we can support as a legislature. We don't have to go in and take it over, but we can support by investing. We know it's important for our workforce, and we know it's important for our economy. So, I think, I know the chamber is involved in a working group. Alice Buckley from Bozeman carried a bill that was meant to be a public-private partnership and study the issue. It got vetoed, but I think y'all are going forward with it, basically, without the need for the code. But, I think that there's a lot of opportunity over the next couple of years for us to work with private business to make sure that we're meeting those needs of the workforce in our communities. So the discussions are all over the place, Tom, to answer your question, and I think they're taking place, in interim committees, but also in separate spaces to really come up with a plan, to address the issue.
Well, and the only thing that I would add to what Kim's talking about is I do think that this childcare issue is a workforce development issue as well. I think that you've got a lot of folks that can't go to work because they have childcare issues. And until we and that is one thing I think that the state can do, is invest in that workforce. Because we need folks that can actually go into the childcare industry, because we need that expanded. And so working on educating folks so that they can go into that industry and feel comfortable and start businesses and all of that kind of stuff is something that I think we can invest in. Then it's not, a long-term commit. The commit is we're going to help to educate that workforce and get them as stable as we can. And then you're off and running, because we know that that is one of the most critical pinch points for businesses right now. Is there's a lot of people that just stepped out of the workforce because schools keep shutting down, because of pandemic issues. They've got kids Zooming from school at home. And if telework is not going to be the name of the game for a lot of folks, they're not going to choose to go into a childcare industry, because that's a face-to-face. You've got to do it every day. You got to be there every day in order to basically support that business. So investing in the workforce, I think, is something that the legislature can do, and it's not a long-term dependency, because you educate people and put them into the workforce, and it is something that we can invest in and should invest in, because that's going to actually drive our economy and allow for businesses in the state of Montana to grow, because they will have a workforce that has stable childcare that they can now go to work and feel good about.
Yeah, I think the major step that I see is a good look at the regulation when it comes to childcare. There's a lot of opportunities out there that I think are being missed by some over-regulations that are happening. And I do believe there's a way to do it safely and open it up at the same time. To kind of echo what the minority leader said, is that with the COVID and the school shutting down, I think it's kind of put a brighter spotlight on it. And I do believe the legislature next session will definitely be moving to help solve this problem and allow for good, affordable health care.
Yeah, I think they've covered quite a bit of it. I, as a small business owner, I'm dealing with it each and every day. I have one young employee that him and his wife both work. He's got a 3-year-old daughter, and I allow him to bring her to work 3 days a week. I have another employee whose wife just went to work as a nurse. Now the kids are all in school and so forth. But we deal with early outs on Wednesday at 1:30. So every day at 1:30, no matter what I have going on and how many events I have to make sure that he's on the road to go pick up his kids after school. So businesses are having to figure out how to adapt to this, and they're also certainly having to look at how, because we need those employees there to help us produce. I think Wiley hit it well. There are some unfortunate circumstances that happen in daycares and so forth across the state, but I think the government, sometimes we're very reactionary to those, and sometimes the regulations and the things that we put in place bring it to stagnation, where these daycares don't have the opportunities to do more. I also think it's sad. You look around communities now, we don't all necessarily know our neighbors anymore. We don't know the folks down the street or the older lady that maybe after school the kids could go swing by there for a couple hours. My mom started a business in 1981, was a single mom, and one of the things she depended on a lot was her neighbors to help with the kids, and you don't see that anymore. And I think there's opportunities for churches and community leadership and that to be involved as well. And I've seen different factors, but I know it was well over 100 daycares that were closed due to COVID. That industry got hit very bad when things were shut down, people were sent home, and those businesses haven't came back yet for different reasons. I know the ARPA has put a lot of money into this for different things to try to help, but you're not seeing those businesses reopen, and that's a challenge.
All right, we've got another one right here.
Hey, this is Roger Fleming, lawyer in Bozeman. I had an opportunity to work on SB 297 with Senator Ellsworth this past year. And I just want to say, it's more of an observation. You guys did a great job. It was a nonpartisan bill, and there were industry elements from the big side of the industry, the smaller companies. You guys came up with a balanced bill, and it looks like it's moving forward pretty quickly on the executive side now. And I work in other states with other legislatures, and you guys, I think, are ahead of the curve, and I compliment you in that regard. And also the fact that it was a bipartisan effort. At the federal level, broadband has become kind of a partisan issue, and I think if you guys continue to keep it a bipartisan effort, you'll continue to do the good job you did starting out. And it's more of an observation than a question, but any observations from you?
All right. So I might come in with another question here, and this is more on the procedural. And so there were some comments earlier about Zoom being introduced to legislative hearings, and that changed how legislative hearings worked in a lot of ways. And it depended a lot. There's a lot of discretion for committee chairs on how to handle it, et cetera. But it certainly lengthened some committee hearings, and of course that already puts some pressure on an already 90-day blitz to get things done. But of course it was an incredible opportunity for additional public participation in the process. And so I'm curious for thoughts from any of you who'd like to participate in this question. Assuming that we would continue to have remote participation in legislative hearings, does that change your opinion at all on whether the 90-day every other year structure is going to make sense to be able to fully vet and fully consider all the bills that come before you if legislative hearings become longer with that additional public participation?
Well, and so I'll start it out, and I'm the one that started out and said that I thought that it worked well. A lot of times during the session, we are unable to hear from the people that have to go to work every day. It's, you have to take a full day off to come to Helena to participate in the legislative process versus I got to take a couple of hours off, go home and get on my computer, and then I can get back to work. I think that it really opened up the ability to hear from people that we would normally not hear from. And I don't want to disparage the lobbyists in the room because most of you do come up and actually do work up there. But it is really great to hear from people from your local community about how different legislation will affect them. We hear the standard line from the lobbyists, and yes, we get that, but having that community tie is so very important to what we're doing. So my hope is that is something that will continue in the future. I think that the committee chairs got really good towards the end of the session in controlling timelines and making sure everybody had their say. And our staff really ramped up. I mean, Mark said a big thank you to our staff. You can't imagine jumping into the middle of a session knowing that we're in the middle of this pandemic. The ability for them to ramp up the technology to be able to do what we did is just outstanding. And so I do think it'll be I want it to be a part of future legislatures for that reason, because there's so many people that we don't normally hear from, and it was really great to have their voice heard. And I don't mind a little bit longer of a day if we can hear from those folks. I think that's an important thing, and the control is really in the hands of the chairman, and they all got good at it towards the end. So
Yeah, I'll also echo commending the chairs. I mean, it was, as we know, that the legislature's not the most young and technical people around, so they definitely had a large learning curve coming into it, and I was absolutely shocked at I think there was one or two times I had to run to a committee over an IT issue, but our staff was amazing at getting that going. And I mean, there's a lot of pros and cons to it. I mean, time management is a huge one, especially when, like I said, we were moving as fast as we were this session. So it's going to be interesting how it goes forward. So I'm termed out, and I don't want to be one to bind the next legislature. So it's going to be the future leadership's decision with if it stays or if it goes, or how they plan to use it going forward.
I don't have much to add. I think that it did broaden the voices that we heard from. I liked that. I think it also, during a pandemic, it allowed for a safe way for people to participate, which was good. I think Wiley and my friendship really came into focus and came into play, trying to navigate some of the hostility at the very beginning from folks that didn't like it. But by the end, I agree with Jill that it was pretty smooth sailing. People got good at it. I hope that we see it in some form. I think there's room for improvement. But yeah, I hope that it continues, because it did really broaden the voices that we heard from, and I think that's a good thing.
I'll just say, it did. It helped a lot of the citizens. I think you're in Montana when I was listening to an ag committee meeting, and the chairman called for a gentleman that had signed up, and the wife got on and said, he'll be right back. He just had to go out and help a heifer calf, and he'll be right back in. And he came in gasping for air. And so, it did accommodate a lot of citizens in Montana to be able to do that. And I think another thing, all of your industry groups, obviously you have experts in the areas on that legislation, and I recognize that sometimes it's tough for these experts to take time out and travel from wherever they need to. And I think they're just as important as the citizens that come and testify, to have somebody that is very involved in that. And there was opportunities for them as well to be able to participate and not have to go, and especially with travel the way it is now and the challenges, they were able to weigh in and give the committees some expertise that they may not have gotten that way. So certainly can't bind the next leadership. I'm glad I don't have to make that decision and try to win some of the chairmen over. But I think there is an opportunity for it.
John's got a question. Thanks for being here. Most of you have mentioned something about overcoming hostility and tension in the process, and I think a lot of Americans would agree that there seems to be a lot more division in politics these days. And so I guess, what kind of advice do you give people coming into the process to overcome that, so that, Montana, the legislature that we see, doesn't end up like what we see in Congress?
Well, what I noticed this last session, because I will say it did get a little more heated this session, and I think the main thing we were missing that works really well in this state is all of the dinners we do at the beginning of the session. It allows everyone to sit down and actually get to know each other as a person, which helps dramatically when it comes time, when you have those heated discussions, to actually know who you're arguing with. And it was, with the COVID, with all of those going away, with the training, said a lot of our freshmen I felt really bad for, because they went in day one without having the training a lot of us got when we started. So I'm hoping to see that come back, and I do believe that it is good for the state and really helps us as legislators be more civil towards each other.
Well, and so as part of the training, I think that we really need to introduce this discussion of respect, right? And I think some chairmen do that really well during this session also, is making sure at the beginning of a committee hearing, we're going to treat each other with respect. And if you're not going to respect the process and the people that are here that have left their jobs and come here to do this work, you're not going to be involved in the process. I think that the disrespect has really come out of the allowance for folks to express stuff that they normally wouldn't. And so I always try to just put that out there for people. You respect not only the process of legislating and being involved in the legislature, but every one of these people is a person in a community trying to make ends meet, trying to get to the end of the day, trying to work hard and raise a family and all of that. And so seeing one another as people is as important to the process of legislating as it is to do the actual work. So I hope that you all will help get a message out to the folks in the state of Montana that this is not easy work. It's not. And to have to deal with the disrespect and all of that on top of it, it's why a lot of people don't do it. It's super hard work. So I appreciate when people help us by standing with us and saying, hey, that's out of line. You can make your point in a different way. And so I think that is something we can all do together as people that work in the legislature and in our communities. So I hope that we can all work on that particular issue together.
Just a couple items. One of my favorite days every week during the session is on Friday. The leadership gets to have lunch with the high school pages. And one of the questions I always try to ask them is, what surprised you about the week that you were here and what you learned and so forth? And about 90% of the time it's, you guys get along a lot better than I thought you did, and what I read about. And I don't fault media. They're in a very difficult business right now. I mean, we all have one of these. We can get our news so many different ways now. It's just not a newspaper. It's not that. So if they don't have the bright, bold headline with legislators clash or, those kind of things, most people aren't going to read them. So they don't write about the 90% of the bills that we pass 100% or 95%. It's about those bills that really the parties have strong views and they're very opposing that we talk about. And I think there is a difference between the House and the Senate. I mean, the House runs about a 40% turnover each session. It's very hard I remember coming in my first session, fire-breathing conservative, by gosh, I'm going to change the world. Because you come off of an election in November and then you're expected to govern the first week of January. And it takes a while. In the Senate, what's so different is a lot of us have grown up and we're almost like family. We've watched members that have lost wives and husbands and sons and daughters, went through cancer and numerous different things. And it's just that relationship grows as legislators spend more time together. And the last thing I'd say is, if you got an office, get a nice machine and a good bottle of whiskey. And I tell you what, I've shared a lot of drinks with my minority cohorts and members of my own caucus, and I tell you can bridge a lot of gaps that way too.
And 2 ice machines really makes it a good time.
Yeah, the relationships matter. I think they matter a lot, and I think leadership has the opportunity to set an example. I think Wiley and I tried to set an example. If you would have asked Sue Vinton at the beginning of the session how many arguments we were going to mediate in our offices to try to keep them off the floor so that we could do business, we would have guessed low, I think, But I think that our leadership team in the House, and I'm really proud of the way that we work together to try to mediate those things and try to foster relationship and respect. And it wasn't easy, and we didn't always succeed. There were some unfortunate things that did bleed out onto the floor, but I think that we had good communication, we had a good relationship to try to head those things off. But the truth is that we're living through a period of time where we're seeing increased and heightened partisanship, and we're not in control of that. That's a theme and a phenomenon that's happening sort of outside of our direct control. And the best thing that we can do, and term limits are a challenge on this, is set an example for how we want to treat each other, how we want the process to work, and how we want our caucuses to behave, even during really, really contentious and hard times. And, Mark's right that most of the stuff that we deal with, we're mostly agreeing on, but the stuff that is intensely personal, to to us and to our families or to our communities can get intense, and it can be emotional, and it's they're hard conversations. We've all had them. You know, I'm a gay person, and we deal with gay rights issues all the time at the legislative session. That's hard for me, you know, and getting that separation is hard for me. And, you know, having the support of Wiley and Sue in those moments is really important, you know, to try to keep things on the subject of the bill and not, you know, on issues that become personal and, you know, people overreact or lash out. So I think we did a pretty good job, all things considered. Always room for improvement, but I really appreciated the relationship that our leadership had with the Republican leadership this session in tackling, you know, really hard things.
I guess I have a question for you, and I know it's not something that you as legislators can do right away, but tourism is our number 2 industry in the state of Montana. And I stayed at Big Sky this summer for a conference down there, and it was interesting that when we checked in, there was a lady behind me that was checking in. We both had reservations. I was able to stay there. The availability of rooms in Big Sky, and not just in Big Sky, I've been in other hotels in the state, is depending on the number of housekeepers that show up that day. You can go to Missoula, you can go to Bozeman, you can go to Whitefish. It's that way. I see every restaurant that I go to now has help wanted signs. What's going to happen to our tourism industry? Is there something? Is it because we can't get help from overseas? When you used to go to high school, or to Whitefish, to Yellowstone Park, to Glacier, you saw all those people they've been there from Croatia, they've been there from Brazil. What's going to happen to our tourism industry when you have room availability depending on how many housekeepers show up? You have restaurants that may be open for breakfast and lunch because they don't have anybody there for the evening meal or lunch in the evening. What's going to happen to our tourism industry? Is there anything that you can do in the future that would help our tourism industry? Because I can't see, they already limit the number of people going into Glacier right now. What's going to happen to our tourism industry going forward? And I know it's in western Montana. I can stay in Sydney, Montana. I can stay in a hotel in Sydney, a nice hotel, for $79 a night. And if I go to Missoula, sometimes it's $600 or $700 a night. What's going to happen to our tourism industry? It's the number 2 industry in the state. What are you looking at going forward? And where are we? And Mark, I want you to really address it because you live in the Kalispell area.
No, I'm right in the heart of this, and I tell you, it's a challenge. I was just talking to the budget director yesterday, and I said, you know, you think about where our state is and the surplus we have and how well our economy's doing and how much we're underperforming because businesses just can't produce. And it's just not hospitality, it's everywhere, between what they can't get for product, you know, mechanic shops that can't get parts, car dealerships that can't get cars, restaurants that have to close certain days or close sections. I probably turned down another 30% of what I could have done last year because, you know, folks like to mock the restaurant and food industry, but like I always say, I'm pretty darn important when it's your daughter's wedding. And I promise that I'm going to have three servers there. But I think we've also seen a change in the workforce and the mindset a little bit too. COVID did some of that, but I saw it before. I used to get 10 to 12 high school kids a summer that would come and apply. I'm happy to get one anymore. Sports has become a full-time job all summer. I see a lot of challenges with parents that don't want to be inconvenienced with having to drive their kid back and forth to work if they don't have a car. And if I would have made the money that these kids can make now, I just sat down with my daughter. She's 15 years old. She worked all last year for me. She averaged $18 an hour. I mean, that's pretty darn good at 15 years old to wash dishes and do a little bit of catering. I mean, the money that's out there now, and you see it upwards. I see it with my staff. I mean, you have to be accommodating. I don't know from one week to the next when all of a sudden they're going to decide that they want to take a weekend off and go camping. But yet I've booked 5 weddings a year ago. Same with what these hotels are facing. They've booked out a year in advance, and they don't know. So we're trying to, I figure I almost have to have 1.5 employees per position just to cover. And I'm really nice to all my family too, so when I call them and I need them to help as well. But this is something I think businesses are really having to figure out how to challenge. And unfortunately, you know, as a small business owner, we've got a customer base that's grown accustomed to certain things. Hotel chains, when a customer checks in, there are things that they expect. And that's what we've had to decide to do. We've just had to start to shut down parts of our business because we can't produce what our customers expect. And with social media, I mean, it amazes me. I can have a chain restaurant call a bride a week before and say, you know what, I'm sorry. You were the 4th wedding we had booked. I can't cater it. We're maxed out. We don't have enough employees. If my little mom and pop business did that, I would be completely destroyed in social media, on TripAdvisor and all those other ones. And you can't afford that. And businesses, it's tough because customers expect to go to the bank. They expect the doors to be open at 8 or 9 o'clock and have tellers there. I mean, Starbucks, just drove by there. They were shut down yesterday. I don't know what businesses are going to do. They're going to have to go to automation. They're going to have to go to other things. But it's going to have to work both ways with employees too. I just talked to a mechanic that offered $100 a day to his mechanics if they could hit 90 to 100% productivity rate. First week, $100 bills flying out the door. Second week, about 50% of them. By the third week, he said, I'm back down to 60% productivity. So wages are up, finances up, but that's not the number one thing anymore. It's just that I think workforce has changed a lot, and getting the overseas folks in these tourism places, because it is such a step up for that summer months, is a big deal. College is a tough deal with where they send this end in early May, and they bring the kids back in late August. When tourism season runs into September is a challenge because it's hard to hire college students if they're going to be leaving the second week of August. So that's probably more than you wanted to know, but I'm not necessarily know how to fix it, but it's a huge challenge right now.
Thank you for that question, Gary, and thank you for the answer. And as the Senate Majority Leader, you helped us out by starting the session and closing it for us at the end of the timeline. And I'm going to limit my remarks, but one, obviously, thank you very much for taking the time this morning to spend it with us, to discuss with the group, answer their questions. One observation that is really, I think, incredibly encouraging and hopeful is really the collegiality you show for each other and the relationships that you talked about across the aisle. And it's wonderful to know that whether it was true or not, the days of Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill having a drink after hours, whether that was true or not, it's nice to know that it continues in Montana. But from a business perspective, that collegiality is so important to provide that business climate that's predictable to business. So thank you again, and thank you for all the work you did in the 67th session, as well as to all your colleagues as well.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you again to the panel. We appreciate your leadership. As a former legislator's daughter, I can say I personally understand how much of a toll it can take on you as individuals, on your families, businesses, but we appreciate your efforts. So thank you very much. I'd like to go ahead now, and we're going to shift right into everybody's favorite, the tax panel. I've heard some rave reviews on my good friend Ron Yates, so I'm excited about this. During the 2021 legislative session, there were several major tax bills that were passed and signed by Governor Gianforte, both at the federal level. Several changes are being considered in the tax structure. So our next presentation is going to go into an overview of taxes in 2022 and what their impact will be on our bottom line. And we're going to have Angie Murdo, a friend of mine from the Montana Chamber Board of Directors. She's a CPA and shareholder with Andersons or Mullen and Company as well. So please welcome Angie to the stage.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be able to introduce the next session of taxes in 2022 and your bottom line. As everyone knows, tax laws change all the time, both at a state level and a federal level. And so we are actually very fortunate today to be able to have two experts in this field to help us walk through many of these changes. Ron Yates is a partner in charge of Montana for Eide Bailly, and then Adam Sweet is a partner in charge of pass-through entity consulting for Eide Bailly. And they will update you on some federal tax updates and then also do a brief legislative update as well. Some of those tax changes that they talked about just in the previous session will kind of be mentioned as well. After they go through their presentation, there should be a little bit of time available for questions, and so we will have people walking around again with mics for some question and answer at the end. And so with that, I will turn it over to Ron.
Thank you, Angie. We appreciate being here. I saw the room scatter here a little bit. I hope that's only because everyone had to go fill their cup full of coffee and you'll come back because taxes in the morning doesn't sound that appealing, but Adam and I do promise that this should be the most exciting session that you have today. So, we'll try to commit to that. If this is not the case by the time 10 o'clock rolls around, we will not have done our job. So, thank you for having us here today. Our bios are in the Agenda magazine, but I did want to let you know that a little bit about my background. Again, I'm from Billings. I'm a tax accountant, and I run the office in Billings. We serve clients throughout Montana, out of that physical office as well as around the United States. But I'm a fourth-generation Montanan. I grew up on a cattle ranch west of Red Lodge. So my family, a bunch of little fifth-generation kids running around our cattle ranch at Luther, Montana. So that's where I grew up. I went to college, undergraduate and graduate at the University of Montana in Missoula. I do want you to know I did cheer for the Bobcats last weekend. So, right, we're all in this thing together. So apparently I didn't cheer loud enough, but we're very proud of the Bobcats at the national championship game last weekend. So what Adam and I want to do today a little bit is we're going to talk about taxes, and we're going to talk about maybe 2021, 22 tax issues. Again, as we heard this morning, taxes really are inherently political, right? They go through a political process at the state level, at the national level. However, our discussion today is certainly not political. We, as accountants and professionals in tax and accounting, we have to deal with the rules that we're given. And our clients and our friends and our legislators are both Democrats and Republicans. And so we're always proud to we interpret the tax laws and the tax rules, and we have to implement them, but we are not political animals whatsoever. I do see Alan Lloyd out there. He's the executive director of the Montana Society of CPAs. So most of you hopefully are aware, as a CPA in Montana, we have our state society, but we're also pretty involved in the political process here in Montana, and generally from a nonpartisan standpoint, but we provide resources and testimony. So hopefully legislation, particularly tax legislation, is the best it can be when it, should it pass and become law. So let's see if I can do this from a distance. There's our photos, and we'll talk a little bit more about our background. And there should be time at the end for questions, for sure. So other than Courtney Kibblewhite, you're not allowed to ask any questions, okay? So just want you to know. There's a couple slides here about my firm. We're not going to talk about that so much. Our firm, Adam and I, are both partners, owners at our firm, Eide Bailly. But we are a large public accounting firm. Hopefully you all either work with us or you have some experience working with us, or at least you've heard us. We have great resources throughout the country. You can see that we've been serving clients for more than 100 years. Our headquarters is in Fargo, North Dakota. We're one of the 25 largest accounting firms in the country. We have more than 40 offices in 14 states as well as in India. 2,500 employees, and last year our firm revenue was about $450 million. Industry depth, again, we're going to talk taxes here very quickly, but at least you can see lots of times, in Montana, accountants are generalists. We do, from soup to nuts because that's what our clients do. But you can see that as an accounting firm, we do have a lot of expertise in a lot of industries, and we pride ourselves in that expertise. But like I said, as a tax accountant in Montana, I think the next slide talks about our specialties, but I do a little bit of most of these things. So I guess the point of this slide would be, if you can see it, is accountants do more than just tax and audit. We do a lot more things, and hopefully you all utilize an accountant to help you in your businesses, to help you with your personal taxes, to help you, if you need a business valuation, if you're going to do gifting, if you have, a investment banking type of needs. So reach out to your accountants. We are a great resource, whether your accountant is at Eide Bailly or otherwise. So what I'm going to do is we're going to take the next 50 minutes, including questions, and Adam is going to step to the mic here, and he's going to give us a federal tax update, more what's going on in Congress right now, that we keep hearing in the media, status of various things. And then I'm going to come back up for the last 10 minutes or so and talk about Montana-specific tax items that hopefully are applicable to all of you, okay? So I think with that, I'll turn the mic here and the clicker over to Adam Sweet.
So as Ron said, Adam Sweet, I'm a partner. I sit in Spokane, Washington, but I'm part of our national tax office, so I'm kind of a resource for our whole firm. So get invited to do things like that. Just really briefly, I'm an attorney by training, not a CPA. In a prior life, I was an IRS litigator, and then I worked for a firm in DC, but I was born and raised in Spokane, so had a chance to come back to Spokane, so very happy to be back kind of on the west side of the country. And I'd say, too, if people have questions as we go, please raise your hand. I think it's always easier to address questions in the moment versus afterwards, because typically, if someone has a question out there, it's probably the same question other people have. So with that, and this is really, there's been a couple of different versions of what's happened in DC, but kind of from a very big perspective, back in the spring, and then particularly in the late summer, we had clients, 24 hours a day calling us to say, what's going on in DC? We've heard rates are going to go up, uniformly go up, right? Not just businesses, but individuals, capital gains. Everyone's rates are going to go up. And what should we be doing right now, right? From a client perspective, if your rate's going to go up, the client's thinking, what do I do right now? So indeed it was put out there, and it's still out there. We'll see what really comes from this. But, in terms of the rate increases, at the end of 2017, the corporate federal rate was dropped to a flat 21% rate. So I always say, whether you're Apple, Amazon, or whether you're, Spokane Incorporated, you're paying a flat 21% rate if you're a corporation. Pre-2017, that was a graduated spectrum. It could be up to as high as 35% if you were a corporation. I don't know what the lowest rate was, maybe 15% pre-17. But part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, they simplified that and said, hey, everyone just pays a flat 21%. This has been a pretty popular target if you're in DC and you're looking to raise taxes. I think probably a lot of our predictions were that's a very likely rate to go up, because it's a lot of closely held businesses, our type of clients aren't corporations. So it's an easier rate to target. And indeed they did this, they being our friends in DC, but they've proposed anywhere from restoring up to a 35% rate, to perhaps a 28% rate. But either way, raising that flat rate from right now at 21% to 28, 29, 30, 35%. More probably important to a majority of our clients was on the individual side, because most of our clients, if they own businesses, they pay their business profits on their individual returns. They're getting a K-1 from an LLC, and they're using their individual rates to pay taxes, not the corporate rate. And indeed, they simplified the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 17, simplified things. They lowered the brackets, so there's fewer brackets for individuals. and then also lowered the top rate from, it was 39.6%, and they lowered it to 37%. But again, as part of raising the corporate rate, they also came up and said, hey, we're going to restore that highest rate. So rather than it being a 37% rate, we're going to restore that 39.6% rate. It matters for everyone making wages, it matters, but also, again, for all of our business employees that are paying business profits on their own return, that's a big number. And particularly, well, in another couple of slides, but some business tax law changes to go along with it. And then also, this was probably the most popular question we had this summer, was potentially taxing capital gains rates at ordinary income rates. So right now, capital gains are taxed at either a 15 or 20% rate from a federal perspective. It depends what your income is, but maximum federal rate is 20% plus potentially 3.8%, so 23.8%. What they said, what our friends in DC said was, well, if you make over a certain amount of money, and I think the target number over the summer was if you make more than $1 million, that we're going to tax capital gains at 39%. So that's a huge jump. That was probably the most popular question we had. And really what it was from clients that maybe were sitting on appreciated positions. So maybe they have a business that they're thinking of selling. Maybe they're sitting on stock. Something they're thinking of selling in the next couple of years. The number one thing they would call us and say, should I be selling right now? And why? Because, well, 20% sure sounds a heck of a lot better than 39.6%. And especially, those of us that live in states, Washington State, we don't have an income tax yet. They keep trying, but we don't have it. But, if you're in California with a 10 or 11% capital gains rate, if they raise it to 39%, you're talking effectively a 50%, you sell your small business, you're paying 50% of it back to the government. So lots of clients called us up and, thinking of all kinds of creative ways to trigger tax, right? Should I sell it to my brother? Should I sell it to my son? I have to find some way that I have all this gain. And I think most of our recommendation really was, don't do that. I mean, if you're ready to sell, sell. But otherwise, there's no sense in engaging in an artificial transaction to trigger tax. And part of it is because all kinds of ideas come up in DC, and we all get worried about them. And I think we've seen from experience that it doesn't always necessarily come to fruition. The other big one, and this came up mostly in the real estate space for a lot of our developer clients, but there's a provision of the tax code that says that you can sell real estate. And normally, if you call Ron up and say, "Hey, Ron, I just sold something," Ron's going to say, "Well, you're going to pay tax on that." And there's kind of a magic provision. It's called 1031. You've probably heard 1031 exchanges. And the idea being, you can sell real property, and if you take that cash and buy other like-kind property, you cannot pay tax. You take carryover basis. You don't avoid the tax forever, but if you can roll it over enough and wait until you die, you effectively can avoid tax. And so that's kind of the that's the play, right? So that's it's why do we have 1031 exchange? Why is it only real property? Why can't a business owner sell stock and roll their gain over? All good questions. Real estate's a favored child in the tax code. But one of the proposals up in DC was to limit that benefit, that you could only roll over $500,000 of gain. So if you sold real property and you had $5 million of gain, $4.5 million of it would be taxed, even if you bought like-kind property. So that's a pretty fundamental change. I think that one kind of surprised us, because especially people in the real estate space that are very accustomed to, if they don't want to pay tax, they're very accustomed to, find your intermediary, you go find like-kind property, and you can avoid tax. Now, what you also see is any time up in DC when they start to talk about changing the tax code, you'll learn who has power and who doesn't have power. And probably the most powerful lobby is the real estate lobby up in DC. I mean, I once heard a quote that it really touches every district in every state. If you think about real estate agents, brokers, developers, even nonpartisan, Democrats, Republicans, everyone listens to the real estate lobby. And so this one was quickly shot down, even before they're still talking about maybe rates perhaps increasing. I think this one is off the table, and you can thank the real estate lobby up there that once this was on the radar, it was kind of full out war up in DC to take that off the table, and I think with success. I don't do much international tax. Really, I don't do any international tax. My focus is really the domestic tax. But the other side of the U.S. tax system is that if you operate in multiple countries, you pay tax on your worldwide income. So even if I do business and I sell something in Canada, not every country does this. Like I think the United Kingdom, for instance, is a territorial system, meaning that if you earn income outside of the United Kingdom, you don't pay tax. But our system for the last 70, 80 years has been, no matter where you do business, you pay tax on that income. So we have this whole parallel set of rules for, well, here's how things work when you do business here. And then we have all these other rules for here's how things work when you have an Irish subsidiary, right? When you're Amazon or when you're Apple and you locate your intellectual property in Ireland, we have a whole other set of rules out there. Super complex, that depending on who you listen to, there's perhaps a lot of abuse of that system because, the theory is everyone pays tax on their worldwide income. In practice, that doesn't happen. There's all kinds of games you can play for shifting profits back and forth. So there's stuff up there in DC right now there's already were fundamental changes in 2017 to the international tax regime, and they're talking about it again. It's not my area, so I'll kind of move on from it quickly. The one controversial idea, though, is for certain large corporations, they would pay tax based on book income. So book income would be your financials. There's income tax doesn't follow financial accounting. It can, but like one quick example or easy example is depreciation. We have tax depreciation where you can write off the cost of something 100% in the first year. You can't do that for financial reporting purposes, right? If you give a profit and loss statement to your bank to get a loan, you're going to be amortizing that equipment over its useful life. And there's many other examples, but the idea is that you have these corporations out there that are obviously very profitable for financial reporting purposes. So I shouldn't keep picking on Apple, but it's the one that always comes to mind. When they file their 10K, it shows $1 gazillion of profit, yet when they file their tax return, there isn't $1 gazillion of profit, right? There's no profit. And it's not Apple's fault. It's Congress that created this system. It's not Apple's fault. Apple's just playing by the rules they were given. But the idea is no matter what your tax return showed, and this wouldn't be for our clients, I think it's for businesses with over $1 billion of gross receipts. But the idea is no matter what your tax return shows, you'd be taxed on a minimum amount of book income, 15%. We'll see. I mean, some people joke that why don't they just change the tax code? If really what they want to charge is book income, you could certainly change the tax laws and conform tax accounting to book accounting. But Congress never makes anything easier, never makes anything simpler. So instead, they've come up with this idea. Renewable energy. This is a favorite. Favorite up in DC right now. All the different. You think electric vehicle tax credits. I think it's a $7,500 tax credit for at the federal level. I think there's credits for putting in EV charging stations. So this is a big thing up there, trying to expand that credit. The EV credit phases out right now, I think, based on the number of vehicles sold. It's like if you buy a Tesla right now, you don't get the credit anymore because Tesla sold more than a couple 100,000 vehicles. So they proposed to change that. They've proposed to say you can get the full federal EV tax credit. I think it's up until 50% of the cars sold in the states are electric. So effectively what that would mean is you can once again get a tax credit from Tesla or from another maker who right now you can't get an EV tax credit from. There's kind of an extra juice there that they've proposed a $12,000 credit if you buy an EV car from a union facility. And it turns out that the only automaker right now is Chevy that would make a car, and there's actually a particular senator and a particular congressperson from Michigan that may not surprise you that they're the ones that are the big proponent of this. So, but a lot of it there. Other miscellaneous, you're going to tell my bias here because I used to work for the IRS, and I think I defend the IRS more than people are always surprised that I know now that I'm on the other side of things. It's the IRS has a really hard job. Other countries in the world don't have voluntary tax systems. Like I think France, for instance, they fill out a tax return for you and they mail it to you and just say, this is what you owe. We have a system where we have the exact opposite, right? I can go to TurboTax and I can put any number I want on that tax return. You can, and it's does it work doing that? It's the joke I heard is that it's your opening offer, right? When you file a tax return, it's your opening offer. I heard this from one of my partners early on, and it always kind of stuck with me that it's a voluntary system, right? You can go put whatever number. I mean, you might go to jail, or other things might happen, but it's a tough. I guess what I mean to say is it's a tough job for the IRS. If you think of all the different industries that exist in the states, and all the different types of taxpayers that exist, you have Congress that changes the rules every year. IRS is always hauled up in front of DC. No one ever compliments the IRS on anything. Even if they do something right, no one ever compliments them. So people get really upset when they talk about increased IRS funding. This is why I gave the background. It bothers me less because I don't view the IRS necessarily as the boogeyman, but I understand that there could be other people out there that have had different experiences. But there is some idea out there that the IRS needs more money and to increase enforcement. For instance, in my area of specialization is partnerships. So this would be LLCs, general partnerships, limited partnerships. Right now, less than 1% of partnerships are ever audited by the IRS. And there's a lot of reasons for it. It's very hard to audit a partnership. It's complex. The rules are complex. Agents typically just run away from it. But is that a good tax system where certain returns, so if you file an individual return, maybe there's a 30% chance of being audited. But if you file a partnership return, there's less than a 1% chance of being audited. And is that really a system? Is that an equitable system? So there's some idea that there should be more money given to the IRS, and perhaps the IRS can focus, on certain areas of the system, maybe where there's not high compliance. So I can understand people may have differing ideas on whether we should be giving more money to the IRS. Certainly, I think there's lots of politicians up in DC that would disagree that the IRS needs more money, but it's out there. It's out there too because whenever they're going to pass something in DC, they need revenue, right? Whenever they're going to do like the electric vehicle credit, they need revenue. And increased IRS funding, supposedly if you give $1 to the IRS, it brings $5 back into the fisc. So that's also the reason why they're pushing IRS funding. They're saying, hey, if we give $1 billion more to the IRS, we can go spend $10 billion. We be in Congress because of the way we figure out revenue raising. And so the other big change, and this is actually likely to happen if they actually ever pass anything, is the net investment income tax is also called the Obamacare tax. I don't know if anyone's ever had kind of experience with it. It's a 3.8% surcharge on certain types of income. It turns out it's a very easy tax to avoid. Legitimately, it's an easy tax to avoid. You don't even, there's nothing abusive about it. They kind of created a big hole in the statute where it's very easy to avoid. And if you have certain types of business income, you can avoid it. What they're proposing there is everyone's going to end up paying, if you make more than a certain amount of money, everyone's going to pay that 3.8% surcharge. So whether you're going to be a wage earner, whether you're a business owner, no matter who you are, if you make over, the magic number they talk about is $400,000 or $500,000 of income, but bottom line, effectively you could be paying 3.8% more tax than you pay today. And it's clever, right, how they do it, because they don't call it a rate increase, right? Rates stay the same. It's just a surcharge that they tax, that they put on top of it. A lot of our clients, like if you operate as an S corporation, for instance, you can avoid this because the way it works right now, if you have an S corporation, you pay yourself a wage, and the wage is taxed unfavorably. But all your other earnings that flow through, you can avoid potentially that net investment income tax. So that will no longer be, if they make the changes they're proposing, that'll no longer be the case. So that'd be a big deal for our clients who operate in the partnership and the S corporation form. So Build Back Better, kind of where do we stand now? So Build Back Better was passed by the House in November, sitting in front of the Senate. We'll see what the Senate does. But interestingly, like 70 to 80% of what was first put on the table is not there in the Build Back Better in terms of tax. I mean, not the other stuff, but in terms of the tax changes. So the headliner was, right now, no individual income tax rate increases, no capital gains rate increases, no repeal of 1031 exchanges. So I think these things are all pretty surprising to us, because I think over the summer, I would have predicted maybe they won't raise capital gains rates to 28%, but surely they're going to raise them to 25%. In the corporate rate, surely maybe they won't raise the corporate rate to 30%, but if it's at 21%, it just seemed too easy for them to raise the rate a little bit to fund whatever the priorities are. But due to certain senators, I think, as part of the negotiation, that those rate increases were put off the table and they weren't included as part of the package that was sent to the Senate. Unfortunately, if you operate in the international realm, all those international tax changes are still on the table, and they are going to be a very big deal, less so for our clients, but certainly for the larger multinationals. It's a very big deal, likely to pass. I mentioned the net investment income tax. If Build Back Better passes, the net investment income tax expansion is likely to pass as well with it. So that is a big deal for our clients. And then the other provisions, increased Irs funding, likely to happen. I don't know by how much. There's another provision, I glanced back briefly. There's something called qualified small business stock. I don't know if anyone's ever run into this before, but if you own certain types of stock in a startup business and you do certain things, including hold it for 5 years, you can sell the stock and pay no tax. So that's a nice, that's a nice freebie if you can plan into it. Or really, more often than not, we have clients that didn't even know about it, and they're getting ready to sell their business, and you just ask them a few questions, and you're like, guess what? You're going to pay zero tax on that. It used to be a 50% gain exclusion, meaning that half the gain you would get taxed, half the gain was not. They changed it in 2010 to make it a 100% gain exclusion. They're talking about going back to a 50% gain exclusion. And it can get very technical in a hurry, but we have a lot of clients that it's capped that you can't have any more than 50 million of assets. That's one of the requirements to be a qualified small business. So it happens to fit our client base. There's a lot of clients out there that fall into this, and that maybe there's no grandfathering either for this. So what it means is if you sell qualified small business stock a day after, if they make this change, suddenly you're going to pay tax on 50% of it versus excluding 100% of it. Prospects, we have a DC, we have two people in DC, and I don't think anyone has any idea what's going to happen at this point with Build Back Better, genuinely. You hear, obviously there's a ton of pressure from the House, there's a ton of pressure from the administration, because at this point they have to do something. That I think they view it as kind of cataclysmic if they don't do anything. But what you also hear, though, is you hear that there's a couple of senators that we all hear about that perhaps publicly anyways are highlighted as being in the way of things. I think what we hear is there's actually more, those couple of senators are kind of, you could say brave, I might use the term brave, but they're happy to put their name out there because there's other people behind the scenes that also don't probably support all of this 100%. And maybe they don't want to take the political fire. So it just goes, who knows what will really happen up there. I think back in the fall, we would have said for sure they're going to have to pass something by the end of the year because they've put so many eggs in that basket that it's kind of almost, it's a little comical is too strong of a word, but it's almost kind of, it's almost embarrassing, right? For them to have put that much effort into it and to not know that they were going to pass it. But really more importantly for us then, that as we're looking to advise our clients, we just don't know. But I think what it goes to show too, though, those clients that I mentioned that were calling us back in the summer, panicked and wanting to sell their company to their son or their dad or whatever, that it goes to show too, that's why you don't make panic decisions, because 6 months later, who knows? I mean, none of this could happen at the end of the day. It could just all be a nothing. Now, at the same time, when I said that rate increases are off the table, is it possible that they could suddenly be put back on the table? I think absolutely. It could be, certain senators could say, hey, we don't want the international tax stuff, but we're okay with the capital gains rate going to 25%. And what's likely to happen is whatever the Senate does, it's going to be likely, hand it back to the House, and the House is not going to have a choice. I mean, the House isn't going to like it. But really what's going to happen is if the Senate does anything, now they may not, but if the Senate chooses to do something, they're going to do what they do, which could be incorporate everything that the House did. It could be radically change it. But they're just going to say at that point, House, here you go. You need to pass what we just did. If you don't, that we're going to run out of time, and it'll be the election in the fall. So you just never know from a tax planning perspective that could someone sneak something in at the last second? Absolutely. I mean, all kinds of funny things happen, right? When people are down to the wire and they need revenue and they're compromising and they're making deals. So even though we're saying this is kind of what came from the House, we'll see what happens. So I guess with that, any questions on any of that? I can turn it over to Ron. Yeah. I can hear you. I can repeat your question too, so I can hear you.
This one's working. There we go.
You were talking about additional funding for the IRS, and I'm assuming that is to hire additional people to enforce tax code. Well, financial advisors, and even the news as recently as this morning, is suggesting that people file early tax returns this year because the IRS is still processing refunds for last tax year, and they want you to file electronically because if you don't, they have to hand enter your returns so what are you advising your clients to do this year with regard to taxes, and if they're expecting refunds as a business or an individual, how long it might take for that to process?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the question, where do we stand with, so people are still waiting on refunds last year. Another I don't know if anyone out there has worked with the employee retention credit. It's a special credit that Congress created as part of the Coronavirus Relief Act. The way you claim that was one way to claim it was filing amended returns to claim that credit. We have people that did it a year and a half ago and are still waiting on the credit. So it's, in terms of advice to our clients, I think a lot of our clients extend anyways, meaning that they're not filing right now. But I would say if you're ready to file, sooner rather than later is always better. You get it into the system. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get paid quicker. But I think, I don't know, Ron, you might have better.
I got to sit down. Is this mic?
Go ahead.
Is this mic? Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? There you go. Yeah, I think the advice always is file early as you can and file electronically. The IRS is disheveled. They're very, very far behind. They're understaffed. They don't have good technology. They've pivoted like we all have over the last couple of years, so I would say they are doing their best, but it is, because not only the regular tax work, but all these special credits, all these amended returns, all of that is going through the IRS, and a lot of it, it's jammed up from a technology standpoint. So yeah, I think the advice is file anything you can electronically, file early, try not to do anything in paper or give any reason why you would need to contact the IRS or you would need their help. Really, I mean, go ahead and try to call the IRS. You cannot literally speak to a person. You can be on hold for 8 hours at the hotline and you are unable to get assistance. So anything you can do there, that's good advice.
And you'd be amazed too by how many people still file paper returns. That's part of the backlog of the IRS is people still file to the millions, right? There's millions of paper returns still filed. And they're sitting on a desk, and Ogden is our closest service center, so they're probably sitting on a desk somewhere in Ogden right now. And someone's job is to open those packages up and process that information.
Say they have to key that in. So that's try not to do that unless you have to with an amended return, something like that. Alan Lloyd, I'm not sure you're allowed to ask a question either.
It wouldn't be this panel without your question.
Not really a question, but just an observation. The funding they're talking about for the IRS is for more agents doing audits, which is, from our perspective, insane. If you look at the United States, we have one of the lowest audit rates, so very few people are actually audited. But on the flip side, we have one of the highest compliance rates of any country on the planet. And it's because, I mean, Al Capone, you hear he went to jail for evading taxes. And so as we hear about this funding for the IRS, they don't need more agents out there auditing people. They need administrative staff taking care of the work that they have on these desks that isn't getting done. And so, from the profession standpoint, there's a lot of frustration with how the Congress is looking at giving them this extra funding, because it's completely misguided.
And Alan, technologies, we've all had to invest so much in technology in our business, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing. I'm not sure whether the IRS doesn't have enough money to fund technology, or they choose to fund other things rather than technology, but they need help from a technology standpoint, just like all of us had to pivot to working at home, and the connectivity and technology and speed and RAM and that stuff. That IRS has none of that stuff, so it's a huge problem. Okay, well, I'll switch with Adam here. So how are we doing so far? Let's see, we got 20 minutes left. I'm going to take 10 or 15 of those. Again, focus more on Montana stuff. Hold on, we got to get back to here we go. So again, I've titled the next section here of my talk and the slides a little bit of odds and ends. So we don't have, Montana legislative session is not in session, so we don't have pending legislation. We don't have Build Back Better that we're worrying about. But there are a number of things that I want to talk to you about today. And sorry my slides are so busy. I'm not sure if you all can see those or not, but I'm going to hit the high points here. We're certainly not going to read those. But just kind of a Montana tax update here. So first of all, generally Montana follows federal. So a lot of things that happen at the federal level affect your Montana business or individual return, right? So just a few notes on there is that this year, individual tax returns are due April 18th, not April 15th. So you get a couple extra days because of Emancipation Day in Washington, D.C. that pushes the deadline to a Saturday, that pushes it forward all the way until Tuesday, April 18th. Probably more important for all of you, your estimated fourth quarter tax payments are actually due next Tuesday, January 18th. So if you're a small business owner with pass-through entity, if you're a self-employed individual like Adam and I, you need to make quarterly payments. Those payments are due next Tuesday, right? So make sure you comply with that. You see some of the other things I put up on the slide is Congress did away with the tuition and fees deduction, and they enhanced it by adding a federal tax credit, right? So Montana, you used to get that deduction as we started with federal adjusted gross income. Well, that goes away. Thus, you lose a deduction. There is no tuition and fees deduction for Montana. Again, this is for 2021, so these are tax returns that we will all file in the next 3 months, right? So also, you remember if you're age 70 and a half or older, you have to take a required minimum distribution from your IRA. We didn't have to do that in 2020. You need to do that in 2021, and you should have already done that. If you haven't already done that, and you should have, leave this room and talk to your CPA or call your financial advisor, because I think I noted up there, the penalty is 50% of the amount that you should have taken out. You can fix it, but you need to fix it fast. We all got, if you remember, March of last year, March of 2021, everyone got $1,400 tax credit check or deposit from the IRS or from the U.S. Treasury into your account or in your mail. But not everyone got that. So this year we have to reconcile that on our tax returns. If you got your $1,400, you're good. If I didn't, maybe I actually qualify now that I file my 2021 return, and I should claim it. But you need to talk to your CPA about that. You should, your kids, your dependents should have also gotten those $1,400 checks. But that all needs to be reconciled on this year's tax returns. Also, for businesses, lots of COVID-related money came in last year, necessarily. PPP funds, lots of grants, idle grants, the things that I've noted up there, shuttered venue operator grants. Those are generally not taxable, so that's good, but they do need to be reconciled on your tax return. So not taxable, but you're going to need to get your paperwork together for that if you got any of those. And hopefully, if you got a PPP loan, you filed the paperwork to get that forgiven. You should have done that already, or you should be doing that. We obviously heard from the legislative leaders this morning. The legislative session ended the end of April. I've noted up there that there were 1,300 plus bills introduced, and 300 plus of those became law. I've noted up there that $120 million of tax cuts were included in those laws that were enacted. So what I'm going to do is I picked 5 or 6 pieces of legislation. I'm going to go through those briefly. Again, this is new legislation that was enacted by the legislature a year ago. Some of it's in effect now, some of it's in effect in the future. I just picked them. I could have picked 6 others. There's some legislators in the room that I'm sorry if I didn't pick your bill or the bill that you really love. And a lot of these, again, if Courtney asks me questions about them, I will say I do not know because they were just enacted. We haven't actually went through a tax filing process yet to do so. I don't know all the details, but as they talked about this morning, the first bill is Senate Bill 159, and that is in effect now. So this spring we're going to file tax returns for 2021, right? But now we're talking about 2022 that we're 2 weeks into. As of January 1st, the Montana highest individual tax rate dropped from 6.9% to 6.75%. So that was Senator Hurt's bill. And I've noted up there some comments, but also there was some ARPA concerns about you can't cut taxes in the same year which you get all this money from the federal government. So all this legislation has this ARPA tag associated with it that says if ARPA comes into play, the tax cut doesn't apply. But at this point, that has not come into play. But this reduction from 6.9 to 6.75 will cost the state of Montana, believe it or not, $30 million of revenue. So that's how much is associated with that small tax cut, but that is starting in 2022. The next bill is more of a long-term Senate Bill 399, also a Greg Hertz bill, but really, they talked about it this morning, will completely revamp the individual income tax system in Montana. And so Alan Lloyd and the Montana Society were very involved in this. You know, if you're at all familiar with your Montana return, you know it's about 15 pages long, and it's got a page of additions, it's got a page of subtractions, it's got a page of credits. Even though Amy and I file jointly for federal as husband and wife, we file separate on the same form on Montana. No other state does that. It's very, very complicated for a state that has 1 million people and doesn't have that many tax returns. So this changes all of that. We are not going to file married filing separate. We're not going to have 7 tax brackets. We're not going to have a page of additions and subtractions. We are going to start with federal taxable income. We're going to have 2 tax brackets, 6.5 and 4.7. There's going to be like 3 adjustments. I think I've noted here on the next page some of the things that go away. And again, this goes away in 2022, even though the complete revision doesn't go into effect until 2024, starting this year now, this calendar year, all these tax credits are gone for Montana. You don't get, if you're like me, write a check to the University of Montana Foundation each year. I usually get a Montana College contribution tax credit for that. It's gone. I'll claim it on my tax return for last year, but no more. None of the credits that are listed there. And some of them are very, very specific credits utilized by very few taxpayers, but they still may be significant, and maybe they're utilized by you, but they are gone as of today. The next slide shows also lots of exemptions and subtractions that you all may claim. If you're over the age of 65 and you have interest income, $800 of that interest isn't taxed. That goes away. First-time home buyers deduction account earnings, that goes away. All these things here in the name of simplification. So I think I'm a big advocate of this. It makes things a lot less complex. I know the Montana Society of CPAs was in favor of this, even though I guess as accountants in our own self-interest, right, it should be as complicated as possible because we get paid for our time. This is the opposite of that, and we're in favor of it. So let me check my time here. It says that I should be taking more steps right now. So, okay. Maybe I should step back from the mic. House Bill 629 talked about a creation of a non-refundable tax credit for businesses in Montana that increase their employee count by 10 or 15. There's lots of details in this legislation. I won't talk about it. It was effective July 1st, and it's for net employee growth in certain, I think it's 9 specified industries. So if you're in that industry, this should be a big deal to you. Accountants are not one of those specified 9 industries, unfortunately. Dave Fern sponsored that legislation. 376 changed corporate tax sales factors for apportionment. If you all have a corporation, you know you figure out your taxes between states by looking at your sales, by looking at your payroll, and looking here at this legislation. What did I say? Payroll, sales, and property, where your property is physically located. This double weights the sales factor. So what it essentially does is, if you don't have a lot of payroll and property in the state of Montana, but you are a company that sells to people in the state of Montana, you're going to pay more Montana tax. And the opposite is true, is if I have Montana payroll and property, but I sell to out of state, it will actually benefit me. Again, I'm going to scoot through these quickly so we have some time for questions. I'm going to skip that one in the essence of time. So just here, I've listed a few things that were all really discussed this morning, so I'm not going to dwell on them, but the business equipment tax exemption went from $100,000 to $300,000 for Class 8 property. If you're a property owner or a business that has property in Montana, this is probably a big deal for you. House Bill 252 created a non-refundable employer tax credit for certain trade education. And again, it's capped at $25,000 per business starting last year in 2021. So this will be something that you as business owners and us as accountants will have to be aware of. Hopefully you already are if it applies to you. Alan, accountants don't qualify as one of those trades that qualifies for this credit, unfortunately. And then there was a reduction of production taxes for stripper wells. My last slide here would just be some hot topics. There's stuff that you've all read about in the paper the last few weeks, actually. House Bill 701 dealt with recreational marijuana, but 20% tax on that marijuana. I think I saw in the Billings Gazette the first 3 days that marijuana was for sale in Montana, sales were in the millions of dollars. So 20% of that is going to go into tax relief and funding, new sources of revenue here for Montana, and this legislation passed by the legislature. House Bill 279, you might have saw this recently, where the legislature created a tax credit for funding having to do with private schools in Montana and certain innovative education programs. That program opened up January 1st, right? And it closed January 1st. It literally, if you can read that slide, it was limited to $2 million of tax credits, and those got spoken for on day one. So maybe that's great. That's a great success. Maybe that's a great failure. I don't know. I think I read in the paper that maybe less than 10 individuals made a donation that used up those $2 million of credit. So again, that was something you might have read about. And then they talked this morning about property tax reductions and school funding, which is always controversial. So with that, again, that's a broad dipping our toe in the water of Montana taxation, looking at federal legislation, particularly what's Congress doing right now and what the heck are they going to do. We have about 10 minutes or so. If anyone has any questions other than Courtney, that'll be great. Or Alan, you already got your question. So, we'd love to see if we could answer some of them. And thank you for sticking around and listening to taxes in the morning.
Well, let's have a round of applause real quick for our presenters. Thank you. Appreciate it. As folks think of some, I have one. So Eide Bailly, of course, you consult business clients, individual LLC clients, I assume, on just navigating taxation. And you may have touched on this a little bit throughout your presentation, but I'd appreciate hearing from each of you, or if one of you can summarize it for both. What is the most common frustration you're hearing from Montana-based clients when it comes to them navigating doing their taxes?
Specific to LLCs or Bridger, or just in general?
Let's start with in general, and if as you articulate that, if you think of a few that might apply to maybe some of those smaller companies, that'd be great.
As a Montana CPA, I think that I primarily hear that their biggest frustration is that Montana tax returns are so complex, so complicated. And again, it's not the Department of Revenue's fault. It's not taxpayers' fault. The rules are what the legislature has passed. But like I said, the legislation, the simplification that has been enacted will go a long ways. But for a state that's relatively rural, that has 1 million or so people, there is no reason why we should be compared to New York or California when it comes to tax return complexity. And we're compared with them all the time. Why would your tax system have a page of additions and a page of subtractions and a page of credits and married filing separate on the same form? It's just cumulative effect. And you saw all those pieces of legislation that I just highlighted. All of them had different enactment dates. A couple of them were retroactively enacted. You know, maybe you have an opinion on that, but I don't like that from a tax policy standpoint. But the complexity is a big deal because, I mean, it would be my opinion. Again, I'm in the tax preparation business, so, you know, everyone ought to come to me to prepare your taxes. But most people should be able, in my opinion, to prepare their own tax return. And in Montana, legitimately, almost no one can accurately prepare your own tax return, whether it's a business or an individual return. So that's what, Bridger, that's primarily what I hear. I don't know, Adam, if you have any thoughts about that.
So I'm lucky enough that I don't actually file returns. I'm a consultant, so that's, I'm fortunate that way. I think the one other topic I was brought up when I think the senator brought up the property tax. The thing we hear from clients all the time, and it's actually, we should have talked about it previously, was just the state and local tax deduction on the federal return. You know, right now, it used to be unlimited, right? If you paid 30 grand of Montana tax, you could deduct that on your federal return. After 17, they've capped that at 10 grand. So your property taxes, income taxes, you know, you can deduct it up to 10 grand. If it's over 10 grand, you're stuck at 10 grand. It's a big deal, you know, maybe less or so Montana, but certainly those high tax states, California, New York. I used to live in Maryland, where you're paying 7, 8, 9% income tax. That's a large loss of a federal benefit. And that is certainly on the table right now up in DC is, should they lift the cap entirely, meaning that you can deduct as much as you want? Are they going to raise the cap? Some people have said that they should raise it to 40 grand or $50,000. I think some people suggest if you make over a certain amount, you shouldn't be able to deduct it, period. And if you make under a certain amount, you can deduct it fully. So I think that's another also very popular topic. And from a state perspective, states, and I don't know if Montana does, but states are adapting by letting like an entity like an LLC can pay tax at the entity level. So that's usually for federal purposes, an LLC doesn't pay tax. The owners pay tax. What states are enacting is statutes that let the LLC pay state income tax at the entity level and deduct it as a business expense. So effectively, it's called a SALT cap workaround is the term you hear, but we have more and more states that are doing it. The states don't play nicely in how they do it. They have different versions of it, and they don't always work together. So for instance, if I live in a state, Washington State doesn't have income tax, but if I live in a state with an income tax, that state may not give me credit if I elect to pay the tax. Like let's just say I'm in California and I have an LLC and I pay California tax at the LLC level. Another state may not give me credit for that tax paid, which would mean effectively I get that tax is paid twice. So it's something we're seeing more and more states are enacting. I think New York started, Connecticut, California, but more and more states are doing it because it provides a net tax benefit. Basically what it lets you do is get a full deduction. We had a Boise client that it was going to save them $1 million of tax effectively, so big number. But it's kind of the wild frontier because every state's out there doing its own, at least from a federal perspective, right? We have a unified tax system, but then you forget that we have kind of 50 sovereign entities out there that, probably even more than that if you think of the state and local governments, but all enacting their own versions of these. So I think that's also, does Montana have a pass-through entity?
To your earlier point, the state and local tax deduction for Montana being capped at $10,000 on the federal 1040 Schedule A, where if you itemize your deductions, is a big deal. Most of the tax returns that we prepare, that deduction is limited, and years ago it was not. And so when you hear about that SALT, state and local tax, SALT, SALT deduction, you primarily hear that, people from the East Coast and West Coast want it raised or removed because of the tax environment there. But it would also be very beneficial for Montanans if that was increased. So that's something you should keep an eye on. Yeah, Montana, we really haven't gotten to the point of having entities pay taxes in order to kind of avoid this limitation at the individual level. So.
Excellent. I think we're running right about on time.
Right on
so
time.
Angie, back to you.
Yes, okay, thank you. I do just want to say thank you to everybody for listening in, and thank you to Ron and Adam for informing us on some tax items. I am an auditor, so I am very appreciative of those who are willing to navigate the tax code. So thank you both very much.
Thanks, Angie. We appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Angie and Ron and Adam. And my two thoughts were, as past exec of the Taxpayers Association, thank goodness we're seeing some reform in Montana. And two, I have a daughter that's a CPA, and thank God she does our personal taxes. So with that, we are ready to take our break. This will be a half an hour socializing, networking break, and we'll see you at 10:30.